introduce yourself, and we're going to start off with our F.R.E.S.H expert, Frank Kitchen. If you could introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and then we'll move on in just alphabetical order with each of our guests. And take it away, Frank.
Sounds good. Hello, everyone. My name is Frank Kitchen. I'm based here in Phoenix, Arizona. I am a professional speaker and a communication coach. So I work with professional associations who want their members to maximize their potential. And because my last name is Kitchen, I teach them how to produce tasty results that everybody desires. When I'm not on stage, what I'm doing is I work with aspiring speakers, professional speakers who want to launch their professional speaking careers, but I also work with student leaders, CEOs, entrepreneurs who want to improve their public speaking. And when I'm not doing that piece there, I'm jumping on webinars here with amazing people to share my knowledge. So here today to share what I can so we can all improve in the classroom. And I'm a former CTE product through culinary, so definitely know what everyone here is doing.
And I don't think that Jaime is with us yet. Jaime Casap, who is Google's education evangelist, will be joining us here shortly. But Mike, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your work?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for having me, Rach. This is Mike Lindstrom. I'm in Phoenix, Arizona. I've been here 14 years. Previously, I was in San Diego. So when we get to the end, you'll see on LinkedIn, there's a JD after my name. So I'm a lawyer by education. But when I graduated from law school, my first big job was working for Anthony Robbins, a motivational speaker for 3 years. We built this coaching company in 2000 called Robbins Results Partnership. It was targeted to Fortune 500 companies. So after we built that for Tony, I started to spread my wings. My niches are predominantly financial, insurance, startups. So when we're talking to leaders and we talk to students, very much like Frank, we're talking to various individuals within an organization. The common thread is communication, how to be more effective, whether it's Zoom, whether it's how you get on stage, how you do those types of things with keynoting, et cetera. So I'm excited to come in and bring kind of the corporate aspect of it, because I've been seeing this in my business coaching practice for the last 6 weeks, is how people are responding or not to this whole thing. So I'm excited to share some of these principles with us today. Thank you.
Hi, Jamie's here now. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, thank you for being here, Jaime. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your work? We were just doing some introductions.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry about technical issues, right? That's where we live today. So my name is Jaime Casap. Welcome to my studio in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm the Chief Education Evangelist at Google. I've been here for the past 14 years, focused on using technology in the education space. I helped start a school here in Phoenix called the Phoenix Coding Academy, focused on computer science. I do consulting work with a bunch of universities and institutions around the world. And I am stuck in my studio. I'm locked in. My wife will not allow me in the house anymore.
All right. And Thomas, can you tell us a little bit about your work?
Hey everybody, Tom Murray here. So excited to be hanging out with you today for a little bit. So in my day job, I run Future Ready Schools nationally. It's a network of about 3,500 school districts across the country. Work pretty much every day with superintendents, principals, school and district leaders on kind of shifting the system, everything from leadership, culture, communication, certainly a vital aspect of that. And then probably do about 70 events a year. In 2020, it'll probably be about 12 events this year with all that we know. But I get to speak across the country multiple times a week, typically in a given year, but obviously COVID has slowed that down. So it's good to be home and have some extra time with my family there as well, but glad to be with everybody today.
Well, thank you. And thanks to each of our guests for being here. We have some fantastic experts, and I know this is going to be something that benefits not only our NCLA community of CTE leaders, but this is also something that I hope you'll share the recording with teachers, with family and friends, because this remote learning and working environment really impacts all of us. And, you know, as we move into this virtual communication becoming a part of our world moving forward, we're seeing doctors now doing virtual appointments. I'm now doing physical therapy through a virtual platform. And I think that a lot of this is going to stick even after we move into a post-COVID era. So when we think about this virtual communication piece and learning how to streamline and saving time and energy through these platforms, what are some norms that need to be established and ultimately be viewed as professional skills or society norms? And I'm just going to start with Tom on this one, and then the other panelists can jump in afterwards.
So, like, let's face it, like, we are dealing with, whether we work in an organization, a business, like, we still are working from an adult end, like getting people to understand, like, stop replying all, right? So I think we can't make assumptions, but if I were to say, like, one main point, it's leading with empathy when it comes to communication. You know, one of the things that I wrote about in my last book, Personal Authentic, was really around this idea that the difference between making a judgment and having empathy is understanding the story. And when we think about communication, how many times have we gotten the email from a boss that's short and sweet and to the point, and our heart has stopped thinking like, oh no, are they mad at us? Are they angry? And, you know, we all know that feeling. And what we didn't see was them driving from one spot to the other, like emailing, driving with their knee at a stop sign just to get us a quick response. But we know that those types of communication, especially in a remote setting, can be really difficult. And we've got to be really conscious of that. So I would say communicate and lead with empathy.
Yeah, so this is Jaime. I want to add kind of my view on this, because I think I've seen a lot of negativity around, like, you know, communicating online and how we interact through video. And I look at it as a positive experience. I don't know if you remember a couple years ago that British, it was on the BBC. It was an analyst whose kids ran into the room, and the wife came in, like, dragged the kids out. It was this viral video that went worldwide, and people were commenting all over it. And it was this big, like, surprise that something like that would happen. And I think that that's now done. Where, you know, like, my kid can run in here right now and, like, jump all over the couch and nobody would bat an eyelid, right? Like, I think that things, our fourth wall has been broken down. And I think that's a positive thing, right? So whether, you know, back to Tom's point about empathy, I think this idea that we recognize that we're not going to be perfect if we're talking virtually, if we're working this way, that sometimes your dog's going to start barking or sometimes and not freaking out, right? So this is more, I think that there's an acceptance of the fact that we're not perfect and that our environments aren't perfect and they're not perfect soundproof communication environments. And I am excited by that. I'm excited that I can have a meeting like I did 30 minutes ago with my puppy on my lap and nobody cares, right? Like, I'm excited by this.
Yeah, and I'll kind of pick up on where Jaime left off too, is the case, like you said, about your kids jumping in the background. Did a virtual keynote and my kids jumped in. That's actually how they used to advertise the replay, the fact that the kids were involved. So we have to be cognizant also of what our environments are. There's too many people who are jumping on trying to recreate the classroom, but guess what? We're not in the classroom. We're using technology. We're in a new spot. So for all of us who are speakers here, we understand this. Depending on what environment we go into, we adjust based off of that environment and the audience. So we have to recognize that you might say, hey, you know what? I understand you've got 4 tabs open right now while you're doing this. Hey, please go close those tabs. You know, have some fun with it and recognize, hey, we are in a virtual environment, not in a classroom. And one of the biggest mistakes we're seeing right now is a lot of people are trying to completely reproduce the classroom online, but guess what? These is one-to-one learning. It's individualized. They're watching it late at night, early in the morning. So we have to understand, as we share this information and content, we have to really pay attention to what the environment is that we're going to be giving this information to our audience.
Yeah, real quick, I wanted to add this is the concept of being seen. I think that people need to get over it. Those kind of days of being just on conference calls. You know, people wanted to be, you know, on the Zoom, but they wouldn't want to show their video, right? Because they're worried about their bound, or worried about how they look. I had a client to tell me the other day, he's like, man, I've gained like 12 pounds during COVID. I want people to see me. I'm like, look, if you were out in person, face to face, I'd still see you gain the 12 pounds. So the fact that you're on a video doesn't matter. So the fact that we're being seen, I think that's the new norm. I think people need to get out of their way. I don't care if it's in education, corporate America, you're dealing, you know, face to face. People have been FaceTiming and doing things on their phones anyway. But now this concept is just going to be the new norm. You just have to accept it.
You know, and Michael, with that, I recently changed my Bitmoji to reflect the roots, the longer hair, the new look that we're all adapting to in these COVID times, so to speak. And I've heard so many people in the past few years, their hesitance to learn new technology, especially video conferencing. Now this is a norm. And with that, we still have people who, there's some unique challenges that come with it. I read an article yesterday that said that 75% of university students are saying that they're unhappy with the virtual learning and the virtual presentations. That's huge, especially as we think about the possibility that we may not in the fall. It may be that we go back to school and then we have another lockdown. So really learning how to engage with your audience is key. So what are some tips that each of you have for adopting to these new platforms and really being engaging and helping to create a dynamic remote learning experience? And we'll start with Jaime on this one. And by the way, be sure to check out Jaime's YouTube channel. I was watching some of his videos today, and he has some great stuff related to what's going on in the world around us with remote learning and communication skills.
Thanks, Rachel, and I'll send you your $20. So, so a couple of things. One is, let's react to what you just said about college students, because I think it's important that we get to the root cause of things. And so I have a 19-year-old who is having more home dinners with us than he's ever had through high school. And I'm sick of him. Like, I want him to go away, right? Like this is like the revenge of karma, right? All the times in high school that he's like, no, I'm not having dinner with you guys. No. And I'm like, come on, have dinner one night. Now he's having dinner with us every night. And I'm starting to go insane. But he, a couple nights ago, said, look, I know I'm privileged. I know I'm entitled, but I need to go on a rant. And he went on a 10-minute rant about how he did not sign up for this. He did not sign up for these classrooms. But here's the thing, he's not reacting to the communication method or the virtual, the meeting. He's reacting to his lack of experiences, right? That's what he signed up for. He signed up for being social, to be in the same room with people. I mean, he celebrated his first birthday in college with his 5-year-old sister. That's not what he signed up for, right? And so we got to understand that we're not going to solve that problem if we got cutting edge technology. We have to come up with understanding what the root causes for those things, right? So that's number one. That's on the college student side. I just wanted to react to that. Now, in terms of tips and so forth, I wish my timing was better, because the video that I'm editing right now for YouTube is this thing around video conferencing and how people are doing it wrong. Because people are reacting. They're like, I hate my Zoom. I hate being on video calls all day. I have the opposite reaction. I love video conferencing. Like, you guys don't know if I'm wearing pants or not. Like, I love the idea of having my own space and being able to concentrate and all these things. I think it's the equipment that we're using, right? So I think a lot of it has to do when you're hunched over all day and looking down at your desk. That's going to cause back pains. If you're trying to listen to a session like this on your computer speakers that cost $9.99, it's going to be a bad experience. If you're trying to watch on a little tiny screen the whole thing because you got your Netflix open and you're watching one of your shows, that's going to be a bad experience. So I think we can create a better experience. So that video is coming out hopefully by the end of the week, and it's about like what you can do from a receiving communication and a pushing communication when it comes to the video quality that you can use. Just one more tip: plug in your laptop into the router, right? Like that alone will give you a huge improvement on bandwidth and being able to listen and see better.
So I'll jump in there from an interactivity end, and I'll double up there and say, check out Jaime's YouTube channel. It's awesome. He certainly practices what he preaches. Got a lot of great resources there, Jaime. So kudos to you for that. So let me hit it from two different angles. One is the engagement end. Like, when's the last time you heard somebody say, that was the best webinar I've ever seen, right? Like, they're out there, but what is it that makes it such? It's the interactivity. It's the bouncing back and forth. It's not the death by PowerPoint. Like, nobody wants that, right? And so going back to, just like we would say for teachers, like if you're a teacher watching this, it's that begin with the end in mind. So for me, it's what would I want if I was in an audience? So this past week, I did professional learning for 175 superintendents and principals, literally all day in Zoom. And the funny part of the comments, so you get feedback in the comments, is like 50 of the comments basically said, I thought today was going to like fill in with a nice little word, but it ended up being great. You know why it ended up being great? And that's not patting me on the back. It's simply because it was interactive the majority of the time. So if you're using Zoom and you have some time, leveraging things like breakout rooms to get people talking is absolutely vital. People from a learning science end and from a brain science end only can focus for so long. And I really believe that's even amplified more so when it's not in person. So that interactivity is key, whether it's throw this in the chat, raise your hand real quick if you agree, you know, some of those interactive pieces, the polls, those kinds of things, because if we don't interact with the audience, like we can't expect them to be engaged. Just like we would tell a teacher, you've got to own it remotely. From a technical end there as well, you know, I don't want to see teachers going out there and spending even more money on their end. If you're curious, if you're going to be doing a lot of it, like if I flip my screen, I've got lighting on the sides of where I am. I'm sitting in front of a microphone. Now, granted, I'm doing a lot of this, so I don't mind investing a little bit of time, but your lighting and your audio are going to be key. One note with that, and doing a lot of video content, putting it out there, sound is absolutely vital. So people will deal with visual, that if it's blurry, if it's not 100%, so long that they can hear you. The moment somebody starts saying like every other word or they can't hear you, you've got about 5 seconds until they're out, right? If you just logged into this webinar and you couldn't hear much of anything, you'd have a tolerance of probably about 9 seconds and you're out, try something else, right? So I think those are key, but going back to the interactivity piece, when you're running something, pretend you're a participant, what would you want, and plan it that way.
Yeah, real quick on that. That's a great point, Tom. The interactive part. I'm a speaker for F.R.E.S.H. So these are, you know, chapters of leaders. They meet once a month, and you know, I had a bunch of live events like you, Tom, throughout the summer. They're all now remote. I mean, mandatory. So I had one of the chairs for the country had called me on the phone last week, and he's like, Mike, we had some of the best rated keynote speaker was doing a webinar last week, and he bombed. Like he couldn't hang in this format. Are you going to be okay? I said, I'm going to be fine. I love this because I interact anyway. I don't just have PowerPoint and I don't just talk at people like a keynoter for an hour and 15 minutes, right? So the one thing I was going to say is to be able to pause, to just call a timeout. Like I was watching my third grader when I left today. He's got 23 students in the classroom, right, on Zoom. And the teacher's literally, okay, guys, take 2 minutes. And I want you to write down the answers. And there's total silence. You know, kids are down looking at their paper. You know, I think, and people think, oh, that works great for kids. Guess what? When we're in a teaching role like we are here, it's no different with adults. If I said, hey, guys, all right, here's the deal. I want you to take 90 seconds and I want you to write down 3 goals that you want to accomplish and make. Go ahead, start. That silence for most people is awkward. But just calling time out and creating that interaction like you would in a live audience, it was such a powerful thing.
Right. And the big piece everybody's saying here on the panel today is, once again, we're in a virtual environment, and we have to recognize, once again, that we are in this virtual environment. And if you look at all the studies, they'll show, you know, most people have about a 5 to 7 minute attention span, but you're watching groups trying to put 30, 45, 1 hour, you know, webinars together where all we're doing is watching PowerPoints. No one's going to go and do that. So as Mike was saying, you know, for us as speakers, even as for anybody who's an educator on here, generally we try to change, you know, as far as the touch point every roughly about 5 minutes, whether it be a question, some piece of engagement. You have to think about it that way. I've had people, we had some teachers a few weeks ago for a webinar, and I joked around and said, hey, let's go ahead and take a selfie of you on this webinar right now, and please send me the pictures. Let's go ahead and leave some information in the chat. So right now in the chats, people are asking about the microphones. When you're actually treating it, especially if it's live, you're treating it like you would, you know, actually engaging with someone and answering the questions. They recognize you're not this robot. Nobody wants a robot. Right now, we're enjoying that Jamie's cracking jokes and, you know, Tom's moving things around. We're showing that this is real. So once we get on to our trainings, we have to make them real too. And whether we incorporate some music, we incorporate a slide, we walk people around. Once we do that, that's going to get people in. But general rule of thumb is, there's a study right now that goes, if your video is over 15 minutes, people tune out. They turn it off. You know, when you're on social media right now, Jamie can probably jump on this one, but you take a video about 2 to 3 minutes. So if we're trying to about a 45-minute webinar, we're not going to have much engagement. So it's all about how we engage people throughout and understand. They're sitting in their offices, they're bored, they can watch Netflix, their kids are running around, they're in their car. Okay, what do I do to keep them focused on the information? If this is boring me, it's definitely going to bore my audience.
Rachel, the other thing I would add to that, if I could, is, when we think about, and just building off what Frank was saying there, taking a look at the content side. And I know Jaime and I both share, and for the other gentlemen that are on the air, I know we're connecting for the first time today, but we really value the importance of putting content out. I really believe the blog in and of itself is basically dead. Like, don't hate me for saying that, but hear me out. Like, you're scrolling through social media, you see a title, you see a link, with it, nothing else, versus you see a title, you see like a 2-minute clip. It can go up to 2 minutes and 20 seconds on something like Twitter. Like, you have time to watch a 2-minute video as you're walking. How many times do you open up the blog and actually read the blog for something that's worthy, or save it to later in those spur of the moments? Because a lot of times those types of things with social media are in between things. We're walking, we're sitting in an airport, we have that time. And so when we look at content, that video content is king. And so I would really look at, like, that's a communication piece. So if you're an industry, if you're a school district, putting those clips out. For me personally, I don't think I've blogged in a year and a half, but I put out minute clips of content multiple times per week. And I will tell you, the viewership of it from a communication end, instead of having, a couple thousand views in a given blog, is up 4, 5, 10 times the amount, just in terms of interactivity. The other piece that I would say related to that is, every time we do something like this, it's an opportunity to practice what we preach. So if you're a school district leader on here and you're working with your teachers on making things personal or making things authentic, but yet everything you're doing is one size fits all, one directional, like, as lovingly as I can, that's hypocritical. And so regardless of whatever our message is, it's an opportunity to model what we're talking about for those that are looking to us for direction. So it's really that modeling in this environment is key.
And Thomas, I saw in the chat someone had a question about lighting. What kind of lighting is it that you're using right now?
I have no idea. There's so many, and I would actually defer to Jaime. Jamie's really into like the lighting and different types of things. Somebody else asked about the mic. I like my Yeti mic personally. I've had it for a number of years. There's so many different facets of lighting out there. There's lighting for video, lighting for photography. I showed you one. I've actually got multiple ones around the room. Something from a video end to be conscious of. What I didn't do was, in setting up my office originally, you see I've got all these glass things behind me. Yeah, that was a really dumb idea, because I've got to put my lighting in a way that doesn't bounce off and you don't see these reflections of these massive lights behind me. So it's being conscious of that kind of stuff when you're recording and presenting. But I'll defer to Jaime, because I know he's super into the lighting and the types and all that kind of stuff.
So, Tom, I think we have to have a separate call and discuss getting you some soft boxes and some other things. Yeah. So I think lighting really comes down to, here's the best light you can come up with: a window, right? If you can put yourself near a window, not like a witness protection program window, but actually put the window in front of you. A lot of people like to put window behind you, and that's just not gonna, you look like in a witness protection plan, right? So sit next to a window, and that's as much light as you probably need for anything, right? And then you can get lights from, something, a little light like this for, $40, or my giant light, my aperture light here that I use for my videos that I turn on for these calls as well. So, that costs hundreds of dollars. So you can go from same thing with the sound, right? We talked about sound. You can get a speaker that costs $20, which will be much better than your computer speaker, or even the headphones that you're using, that free headphones that came with your phone, right? Like, just upping it a little bit will go a long way. And I just want to say something about speaking at events and webinars, because a lot of us who are speakers, we play off the crowd, right? We kind of react to what the crowd reacts to. And the bigger the webinar, the quieter it is, right? Because everybody's on mute. And so here you are presenting. And I didn't realize this when I launched my YouTube channel a year ago, was that I was preparing for this without even knowing it. Because someone like me who's up on stage and I try to be funny and I tell jokes, if you hear silence, that's the worst thing you can hear. But because I was doing this on video, and then practicing, like saying something funny and understanding that there was not going to be any reaction to it, I've gotten better at it. So one tip is just sit and tell your joke, be funny, and have an expectation that you're not going to get a response. Here's another tip that I think is like taking advantage of, Tom talked about like video time, how long someone can listen to. I think you can listen to if you can sit in a movie theater for 2 hours, you can listen to a story for 2 hours. So being able to shape what you talk about, not in terms of throwing out facts or figures or data, but turning it into a story and telling stories. People can listen to a story for 45 minutes or an hour easily if it's a good story. And then the last tip around this, that I think taking in your environment, right? We talked about what's behind you, but I'm going to give you an example. I've been using this prop a lot, right? The things that are around you. So I'll do something like this, like, oh, hang on a second. I'm sorry. I got to get that. Hello. Right. And then, just using things that interact with people and that you can, like, I can never bring this thing on stage with me. Right. And so all the things that are around that I can put up, like a show and tell, like we're back in kindergarten.
I mean, like a pop like this, yeah, we could have fun.
Right.
And that's the mic piece. I think that having, like, I have this little blue
Yeti,
the snowball, the blue snowball, and I just ordered the Yeti because I realize I'm going to be spending more and more time doing podcasts and webinars for a while. So it's worth the investment, but really even a small investment can make a big impact on your ability to communicate in this virtual environment. And before we got on this call, before we started recording the call, some of you were already in the room, so to speak, the virtual room, and we discussed a little bit about the isolation piece and how that's impacting young people, but even adults. So I'm going to start with Frank on this one. What are some tips for building and maintaining culture and just staying connected while we're in this virtual world that may end for a while, may start again, but that, it's at least for now, folks are really experiencing the sense of being disconnected at times?
Well, a lot of people, like you said, fear, this whole virtual world. And like Jaime says, I'm loving it. I've actually been more productive during these last 6 to 8 weeks because I've actually communicated more with people, had more, connections. So the big piece is the virtual world, however you are in real life, you just have to find a way to translate that over into the virtual world. So Jaime's showing that he's got a sense of humor. So if you got humor, use a sense of humor. If there's a point where you like to engage and connect with people on Zoom, like they said, we've got breakout rooms. We could do one-on-one sessions. You have to just truly be yourself. As we said earlier about some of the youth, I know, like, for example, my son right now, he's doing it. His first question is, how long is this going to be? When we pop the videos up. I mean, so here's a 7-year-old and he's already asking, and like he knows time, like, oh, this one's 17 minutes. Oh my God, that's long. Versus I'm like, this one's 8 minutes. Okay, let's go watch that one. I mean, so because he has that deal. Or as we're going through, as we grow up, if there's a video that you watch, think about what we're watching on Netflix or the movies. What engages you? You should incorporate that into your online training. So as we're giving these tips, so for my kids, because I used to go into my wife's classroom and help her out, I understand that the kids, they love Schoolhouse Rocks. Well, you can go ahead and find a Schoolhouse Rocks video and cut that in. People like to do the videos. As you said, you can share a story. There's nothing saying that it has to be a 45-minute class period. I know the world, says that as far, especially for states, we have certifications, but we all know no one's going to sit in that front of that thing for 45 minutes. So what's the best way to get that content very impactful in a way that people are going to absorb it? And my biggest tip here, and we'll let some other people talk, is what do you see when you're watching YouTube? What do you see when you're watching Netflix? What do you see when you're watching television? What gets you to maintain attention? You need to incorporate that into how you're teaching. And that's what the youth are looking for also.
So I'll add here, like 5-6 years ago, I was speaking to superintendents at an event, and the person who was hosting it said to all the participants, like, what's your number one issue? What's the thing that concerns you the most? And at the time, 90% of the superintendents put their hand up and said, virtual learning. That seemed to be the theme. And I got up on stage and I'm like, what the hell is virtual learning? You're either learning or you're not, right? And so even this idea of virtual, like, you can't pretend to learn. And so this idea of virtual, we can get rid of that word. I just had coffee with my friend Eric, right? Not in the same room, thank God, but on video, right? Like we had coffee. I guarantee you that a year from now, I remember something that we talked about, but I won't remember whether we did it in person or whether it was on video. These are real. There's nothing virtual about this. This is real, right? And so, like, let's just call it that. And so That's number one. So if you stop talking about virtual, then it doesn't become like some kind of substitute. It becomes a thing. And so it's important to think about that. And again, back to the equipment, it's about having good equipment so you have a real interaction. There's a huge difference between watching a new Star Wars movie in an IMAX theater and watching it on your phone, right? There's a huge difference. And so the how you set it up matters. And then the last thing I'll say about this is you need to be aware of where you are on the introvert scale, right? Like, so for someone like me, you know, you say, listen, you're going to have to stay in your studio. No one can visit you. You can't visit anyone and you can't travel anywhere. And we're going to have to do that for like 4 months. And my initial response would be like, are you punking me? Is this a practical joke? Because this is heaven for me, right? Other people might be like, oh my God, there's no way I can be in my space by myself. So where are you on that scale? And then make sure you have a strategy to fix it, because everyone is somewhere, even someone like me who's a dysfunctional introvert. I'm at the point now, like, oh, I need to like meet with people. I need to like go out and like see somebody in a park or something, because everyone's on a scale. So where are you on that scale? And then create a strategy to support that. Don't feel peer pressure into feeling like, oh, I'm alone and I actually enjoy this. What's wrong with me, right? Like, where are you on that scale?
I think another aspect of this related to culture, and it doesn't matter if we're talking businesses, organizations, or schools, is like, what does culture come down to? It comes down to relationships. It comes down to trust, right? And when we look at those pieces, whether it's an education end or a business end, it's how do we foster that environment? You know, when I look at my my own children, I've got a 4th grader, I've got a 1st grader, and just this in this past week, their teachers both have done Zoom meetings where it was nothing academic. One was like a show and tell, bring something that you want to show and tell, with the simple purpose of letting kids be kids, letting them connect, letting them network, where a lot of times from an education end, we start thinking, man, I've only got 60 minutes, I've got to do this, and we start honing right in content. But in this environment, certainly content's important, but it'll never be more important than who we're teaching from a teaching and learning end. And so how do you foster relationships? What does that look like? In running Future Ready Schools on a weekly basis, we have a water cooler meeting that's set up, and our one norm is we're not allowed to talk about work. So it's just a way to just let loose. How's your family? You know, like your daughter just had a baby. What's that? Like those kinds of things. And so it's getting back to the human component. And so I think for the educators on here, one of the vital aspects of it, you know, in working nationally is like, I really, really believe across the board, we are going to start virtual or not, if not somewhat of a blended or hybrid model. And I'm not talking blended learning. I'm talking like some days on, some days off in our schools. And so something we're going to have to wrestle with is how do we build relationships in a virtual and like in an online environment with students where normally we're used to the rah first couple days, lots of doing team building. Okay, if you can't do that, what's that going to look like in a virtual environment? But then recognizing it's not just adult to student, it's also student to student. Going back to what I just mentioned a moment ago is how can we build those interactions there as well? And so when we look at the culture side, when we look at the social emotional side, giving time and prioritizing intentional time to build those relationships is really key, especially if we're going to start a new year.
Yeah, Rachel, Tom nailed it on that one. I'll tell you, about 6 weeks ago when this all went down, I'm a journal guy. I always keep it close. And I was writing down names. This is actually the page I started doing this 6 weeks ago. People in my life that I just wanted to connect with and just see how they were doing. Are you doing okay? Are you struggling? So what I found after the 3rd phone call was people want to talk. People have a story. People are struggling. They're educating from home. They're losing their jobs. So what I did was I literally made a goal, like a list plan of everybody. I went through my database. I went through Constant Contact, my LinkedIn. And every week I would have a name of people I want to just pick up the phone and call and just check and say, how are you doing? 100%. Everybody wanted to talk. Everybody had a story. Everybody's struggling with something. So it made me think about, you know, teaching leaders, you know, my CEOs, for example. I asked a CEO that week, hey, when's the last time you called like your management team? Oh, well, we were on a Zoom last week and we did a conference call. I said, no. For no good reason. Just pick up the damn phone and check on Gina, your VP. Like, she's struggling with 3 kids at home. Did you know that? You know, so that human element that Tom talked about is such an important thing. I think it's true in education. I think it's true in corporate America, but just picking up the phone. I mean, we got so married with texting and DMing and all that stuff. Like, that was so 2 months ago, right? Now it's pick up the phone or get on a Zoom or get FaceTime so you can see people's emotions. And I think that's an important thing to feel that connectiveness.
Yep. And then even on top of that one, you know, Mike, because we're talking about this connectedness, I've been watching groups, and I've even worked it with the entrepreneurs I work with, but my last name's Kitchen. So I'm like, hey, join me at the kitchen table. And we have people just come in and have have a connection, almost like a networking meeting. But I'm seeing a lot more of these virtual happy hours, and we know we're in education. So since we got educators, we're going to have our virtual safety meetings. But we know what happens, like, safety meeting, Bible reading, whatever you want to call it, crochet. But why not have a social hour? And hey, we know how to use the technology now. And as you said, to get together, and this isn't only just for the educators, but why not allow the students to do it? Because they said the students right now are they're missing those connections, especially these seniors in high school. They're used, like there's a picture in Texas last week where they showed these students all went to a parking lot, put their cars in a circle. They're all 20 feet away from each other, and they had a conversation in a parking lot. Right. Because they're missing that one-on-one time, and they wanted to be able to see it. So for us as educators, as professionals, when we're talking about the student aspect is, well, how come we can't host something to pull the students together and say, hey, as you said, what's going on in your life right now? What would you like to share? I mean, we could even have somebody show up and say, okay, let's do, we talked about Star Wars earlier, Jaime. It's like, okay, let's go ahead and let's talk about Star Wars real quick. They want that little bit of a social piece. We do that in the classroom. We have like a social time about, what's going on in pop culture, what's going on in the world news. Before we go into the classwork, we could do the same thing here, because with the technology now, we've got more options to do it. We know how to use it now. Let's go ahead and use it.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Jaime. One quick comment, Frank, after that is, like whoever created this social distancing words, like what a terrible job, because like that is the last thing we need right now. Personally, like I refuse to use it because like we need to be more socially connected than ever before. And so physical distancing. Yeah, totally. I get that. Social distancing, terrible phrase for this time period.
Love it.
Yeah. I was going to add on what Frank said about the connection with students, right? I don't know why we assume that they live in a different world than we do, right? So here we are at dinner, at social hours, all this talking about what's going on and our predictions and the economy and COVID and politics and all the other things that we talk about. But for some reason, we turn to our students like, okay, now we're going to study world history in 1349, right? Like, we need to engage them with what they're feeling. A couple of weeks ago, one of my Facebook videos, I posted an offer to educators. And I said, hey, you got all your kids, online. If you want me to come talk to your students, I'd be happy to do it. Thinking that maybe 10 teachers would respond. And now I got to cut it off because it's like all day. But the cool thing about this experience is that without even realizing it, like I now know how students are feeling, because half of the time I say 20 minutes of stuff. And then what questions do you have? And so I'm in a meeting tomorrow in Ethiopia, right? And so the consistency across the board about like what students are thinking about and what they care about and what their questions are no different. I should post this, a list of fifth graders questions, and I didn't even want to talk to fifth graders. I did it for a friend, and the questions that these fifth graders asked were just insane. They were so powerful and so good and so in line with what adults are thinking, right? And so it's important to like recognize where we are and what's happening and let them talk about it and let them ask questions. And it's because our answer is I don't know doesn't mean that we shouldn't address those questions.
Rachel, one more thought building on what Jaime said that really just stuck with me. And I love that little soliloquy, Jaime. I thought it was awesome on that end. But when I look at take what Jaime was just saying about how we look at kids differently. It's funny. Imagine looking at a student right now. I'm looking at my own children, thinking about them, and I'm telling them like, well, now you're going to have to do this online, and you're going to have to connect to your friends online. And they're like shaking their head, FaceTiming their friend, playing Minecraft with 4 friends, being like, so what? Because that's their world anyway. Now, I preface that saying the privilege of my children having the devices and the connectivity that I know that many children don't. But to live in their world, many of them were doing this far prior than us being forced to do it because of COVID.
And that's an excellent point. I was talking to my sister, who is, for those of you who know me, my sister is stranded in the Philippines. She was in China when this went down, and so now she's in the Philippines. But I was talking to her about the kids that she's working with, because she's still teaching virtually from the Philippines. And she said, for kids, this isn't a big deal. Like, you're acting like this is damaging kids, but this is how they like to connect anyway. And I know for some kids, it is a bigger deal. It just depends on how they like to interact. But yeah, the connectedness piece, I think that we do have, thank God this happened during this time in our history, because we do have so many tools. On Saturday, I'm doing a Netflix party using the extension to watch a movie for Mother's Day with my sister and my mom. So, you know, it's just different ways of connecting. And Michael, you last week we were chatting through text messaging, and you decided to send me a video clip, to stop using your thumbs and send me a little video clip, which I thought was awesome, which is why I added the next question. What is the best presentation strategy or tool that you use for asynchronous communication? So can we start with you, Mike?
Yeah, so the technology I sent to Rachel last week was Vidyard. You may have heard of it. There's a few out there. There's another one. The name of it is ironic or not. The company's been around for a while. It's called Co-Video. Actually, when you look at the branding, it literally says COVID Video. I mean, that's their brand, unfortunately, but that's their technology. But I use Vidyard. Vidyard's great. I use a Mac, so I can have the software here. I can literally hit record, do a video message, 90 seconds. You actually go as long as you want. It's a free technology. Of course, they want you to upgrade if you want to store in the cloud, brand it, et cetera. I have like the $15 a month package, and it's great. So I communicate with my coaching clients. I communicate with my teams, my friends. I'll be sitting there, 11 o'clock at night. People are in bed, and what the hell? I'm just going to shoot a quick video, 90 seconds, and what's on my mind instead of sending. So it's kind of like a virtual text message. I mean, probably everybody on this panel is a little more tech savvy than the average person, but I can tell you the technology was super simple. It took me 15 minutes to figure out on my own. Even clients of mine that hate tech are now doing Vidyards to communicate with their sales teams, their remote teams. I mean, it's very similar to what you might see with some of the other technology you see with Google or with Zoom or with Microsoft Teams, for example, but it's self-enclosed. It's kind of cool. I mean, literally packages the video, you cut and paste, you put the link right into an email. You send the email from you, and it pops up with my face on the thumbnail. You hit play, and you can see the video. So I got kind of addicted to Vidyards. I actually allocate about an hour a day to just doing Vidyards to people, just letting them know I'm thinking about them. Look right in the camera, hit the send button, and it's starting to catch on with some of my clients. It's great.
Yeah, I can jump on board. So that's a great tool. If you have a MacBook or any kind of Apple tool, you don't even need that. You can just You can just use Photoshop or Photo Booth, right? That's so you can record a clip in Photo Booth and just send that out through your email, right? Or if you're on your phone, you can just click a video on your phone and send it through a phone if that's how you want to communicate. I do a lot of speak texting, so I speak into the phone and that's what gets sent out. So that's the way I try to communicate with people. But video is obviously one of the best ways to do that, to get that message out. It's important to again, back to the idea of making sure you're using the right tools. And here's another tip for teachers out there and educators who might not think about like how creative you can get through video and how creative you can get through this stuff. Go download TikTok. I know you don't want to. I know you refuse to. Download TikTok and watch it. I guarantee that 25% of you, and I'm being conservative, are going to be addicted to it. Like literally addicted to it. And when you dive into TikTok and understand it, what you really see is storytelling. And yeah, there's some silly videos, but like the creativity that comes from students and from people about how to communicate in 30 seconds or a minute. You might think about this, right? Like we spend, back to this idea of spending an hour doing a webinar. A car company will spend millions and millions and millions of dollars to develop a product, and then they try to sell it to you in 30 seconds. Right. So how can you sell something in 30 seconds? How can you have your message concise and tight so that you can talk in a video for 30 seconds? 30 seconds is a really long time. And so being able to utilize that time would be great for people.
So for me, if I'm going to answer the best tool, it's difficult without knowing the audience. So I would say what tools are inclusive for people. So like I love using YouTube, like Jaime started my channel about a year ago, but one of the best aspects is turning on closed captioning. Like one of the things remotely we've got to be really conscious of is those that have special needs in different areas. Maybe it's hearing loss. Like when we look at all the masks around the country, we've probably all seen on social media the people that are trying to make masks so you can see mouths. So people that need to read lips, like, is really important. So anytime I look at a tool, is the tool going to be inclusive for especially those people that have learning differences or what have you? So I'll share, my son has a very severe speech need. So one directional things for him really don't help him. So he's using things like Flipgrid and those kinds of things with his speech teacher. So it's not just one directional. So it's very conversational. And I would say the best overall tool, kind of to build on what Jamie and Mike were saying earlier, is this right here. I mean, we've all seen the memes and we've all seen those things where, you know, you take all the things from the 80s and 90s from like the front of the Radio Shack ad, and it's like all literally here. So, you know, to do all those pieces, don't forget of kind of that everyday technology that many of us have. But when talking about a student, obviously what's going to be right for a kindergartner is going to be different than a senior in high school most of the time.
All right. Well, thank you guys for sharing that. Frank, did you want to share out a tool that you're using as well?
I'm pretty much, if you want to call it old school, I've been like, you know, with the clients I've got either emails or like Thomas just said, I've called clients up. I've called people up just to check in on them. Everybody's got some type of video chat. I've actually got a group here in Arizona where they're on the reservation. It's a school I've worked with, and they have a staff meeting. So I'm dropping in for 10 minutes tomorrow just to do a quick, you know, pick me up. So the main one is just to find out, you know, what tools are they using right now, whether it be, you know, Microsoft Teams, whether you're using Zoom. Find out what technology it is and say, hey, you know what, I can, you know, we can all work with it. And then you just, you know, you'll go in. So it's just like regular communication. You ask people, oh, do you work on phone calls? Do you work on emails? Do you work on text? What form of communication works best for you? So that's what you have to find out, is to ask the question, see what technology they're using, how they prefer to communicate, when they would prefer to communicate, and then access it there. So I've been using the phone, video, Zoom, pre-scheduling out Zoom, Google emails to go to people, just like knowing like it's their birthday, to, you know, just to stay in contact. If I've got like a, you know, blog post video, and you just share it with them. But the big one right now too is for anybody out here, educator or not, is I've probably been on about 10 podcasts the last 2 weeks just to share the information. But once you get that podcast, you can send the link over to people, because people right now are looking to absorb content. They have binge watched everything they can on Netflix. I mean, there's nothing to watch. We're tired of watching press conferences and seeing how bad it is and hearing that this state's opened up and our state has not opened up yet. So the case is, people are looking for some type of valuable information that they can grow from. So if you have done a video, if you have done a podcast, if you have written a blog post, share that out there within your network. Educators, share your information with people. What's working good for you? So what has worked well for you? If you are using TikTok, then share that with everybody. All of us, this is a case of there's no book written for this, and we're all, you know, it's learning by fire. So whatever's working for you, the main one is just to get that content out and share it with people.
And I noticed in the thread, Snehal, you shared, or you mentioned about the global pandemic shining a light on equity and being more inclusive. And I saw either on social media or in an email that you are going to be on a webinar. I believe it's with NAPA on this coming up in the near future. So if you don't mind sharing out a link in the chat so that folks can access that, that would be fantastic. And what we're going to do next, we had some more prompts, but I want to make sure that we have a moment to do a quick fire round. I know that each of our panelists that are here with us today are parents. And as you think about both education before this pandemic and what's happening in education now, I want to do a quick fire round of a minute or less responses. Never let a crisis go to waste. Everyone has heard that quote multiple times through this pandemic. So as a parent, what changes would you like to see in our education system in a post-COVID era? And we will start with Michael.
Yeah, I have two boys, 5th grade and 3rd grade, and I've learned a lot as a parent in the last 6 weeks, not only about myself, but my kids. And the one thing that I'm recognizing, watching them, listening to their Zooms and how they do things, and the teachers have been great for the most part, adapting to the technology is very difficult. I know that's not what they signed up for either, right? The teachers. So I want to see more of the creative side. Like when I left the house today, the 3rd grade class, the teacher said, hey, if you don't mind, we're going to take 10 minutes, and if you can move your computer, great, or the phone, and I want you to walk out in your house or your backyard and show us something you worked on over the weekend. Oh, my son was jacked out of his brain because he built this like brick little house that he's doing. We're doing some DIY stuff in the backyard. He was out there giving a lecture on this little fort he had built in the backyard. Now, in the classroom, he wouldn't be able to do that, right? He wouldn't be able to take pictures of it unless there was something special. But the one thing that this teacher has done very well is tapping into their creativity. To the point earlier, one of the speakers said, we don't really talk about the content. We just talk for an hour about what's going on in people's lives. So I think if we can really tap into kids' creativity and what's on their mind, whether it's in the classroom or not in the classroom, instead of, okay, we're going to talk about math for the next hour, we're going to talk about science for the next hour, be able to incorporate into your day, whether we go back in the classroom soon or not, just to be able to let kids tell their story, be creative. And I always think about my favorite teachers growing up. Why did I love those teachers? The reason why I love those teachers wasn't because Mrs. Baker was incredible at English my junior year. She talked to me like a human being. She got me thinking bigger. She got me to challenge myself. So I want to see us do that even more. Bring, as Tom said earlier, that humanistic element to kids and not get so boxed into what subject matters we teach. That's what I would say.
All right, who's next? Thomas.
Sure. So I would say for me, my answer would be a non-negotiable. And I know that sounds really weird to say, but it's all about equity. Like equity is finally on the front burner. And there's been people that have been screaming it for years, if not decades. When you look at our traditionally marginalized groups, when you look at things around the homework gap, at Future Ready Schools, I work regularly with the U.S. Senate Health Committee, with the FCC around connectivity, and it's not just about devices and access, but about 12.5 million students don't have internet access. 70% of them are our Black and Latino families, so what are we doing about it? Number one, finally, every district is asking that question. So when we talk about like when things continue to resume, if that goes to the back burner again, shame on us. Like I talked to a superintendent about a week and a half ago. He had just purchased 750 hotspots. So my first question for him was like, that's great. What happens when we go back to school? Are you going to make people hand them back in? Because if all of a sudden it's like, hey, we recognize you have the need, but now we're going to take it all back the moment we can sit our butts back in a school building, like we were doing it more lip service than we were actually believing it. And so for me, my biggest hope in this regard is that equity stays front and center for all of the work. And it's not just about activity, access and devices. It's also about which kids have opportunities in our schools and which kids do not. Secretary Duncan, Arnie Duncan used to say, like, a zip code cannot determine a child's economic or educational outcomes. And so finally it's front and center, and it needs to continue to be front and center.
That's great.
Yeah, so I'll jump in. I think that there's two angles to this. One is what Thomas just talked about in terms of the system changes that need to happen, right? So absolutely, that's something to focus on as a parent, right? So I have 3 kids. I have a 5-year-old, a 19-year-old, and a 27-year-old. See, my plan to have one at a time worked really well. Now that whole thing crapped on me and it's backfired. They're all in the house at the same time, and I'm going insane. But when I think about the skills that I want them, pandemic or not, it's basically the same. It's just some of it's been elevated, right? So think of it from a business perspective, from a business owner. You're a business owner and you're going through this. Man, what's the first thing I'm going to do? I'm going to try to speed up automation and robotics. I don't want to depend on humans to do work as much as possible, because look what's happening to my business. So we were dealing with automation and robotics already, and now I believe that that's going to expedite. I think you're going to see a lot more work on robotics, automation, machine learning, those types of things, artificial intelligence. You're going to see an escalation of that. That means that what I want our students to really focus on are the skills that we've been talking about for a very long time, right? The problem solving, collaboration, the ability to learn, creativity, those things, the things that we call 21st century skills. and without realizing that we are 20 years into the 21st century. We call them 21st century skills because I think it subconsciously makes us feel like, oh, those are far away. The 21st century is way down there. We don't have to worry about that right now. And what we're realizing, I hope, is that no, those skills are valuable right now, right? That we need them. And if you want to trigger me, call them soft skills, right? They're critical. And when you look at that list, the one that stands out for me is the ability to learn, right? Here's our students who are on their own and they have to be able to learn. And I don't mean the ability to take tests or outline books or, any of those things. It's about how, it's this, I don't know how to do something. I now know where to learn how to do it. And this is how I assess whether I have learned it or not. Like a kid, you want to talk about self-directed learning. That's it. That's the package. And so it starts with this idea of self-awareness, right? So, I mean, how many adults do you meet who say, I'm not very creative, or I'm not good at finance? And the reality is, no, you've chosen not to be creative and you've chosen not to be good at finance because all the information to learn how to do those things is out there. So it's important to do that. And then the last thing that I hope we focus on are digital skills. We've given this generation a pass, right? We call them digital natives. We call them, you were born with this technology. You just naturally know how to use it, and they don't, right? Well, look at the evidence and the data. They don't know how to use these tools. And so if you want them to be able to learn, if you want them to be on their own, if you want them to be able to find information, invent information, I hope that we spend more time really honing down on digital skills, or what I would fit that under critical skills, right? These critical thinking skills that they need to look for information, invent information. So as a parent, I hope that that's what we focus on, the essential things that whether you're at home or in a school, that these are the critical things that we should make sure we start with.
Yep. And then I'll finish up this great answers by the first three gentlemen. So Tom, Mike, Jerry, thank you so much there. But I think my big one is, as far as a parent, is I've got a 4 and a 7-year-old, and I've been noticing now how much more parents are involved in their kids' education, because now they have to be a part of it. So they've got more understanding, respect for what the teachers or educators are actually doing. So I'd like to see that continue. But at the same point, what Thomas said is, I don't want to see all these steps that we're taking right now go away. I don't want to see the switch turned off. We're like, well, hey, we've learned how to incorporate technology and distance learning, or learning outside the classroom. I don't want to see that turned off, because there's certain aspects where my kids are very responsive to it. But now they've got to go back to a classroom with 30 plus kids where they can kind of hide in the corner and not. So we have to figure out a way to combine, what we're learning through technology, like what the kids are engaged with, what they're receptive with, or as, Mike was saying earlier, my kids have gone out to build obstacle courses. They've gone out to, build a scavenger hunt. They've learned how to draw it. How do we continue to incorporate that piece in where it goes like, well, hey, it's not just read, regurgitate. It's like, well, hey, you are going to be independent learners. We're allowing you to have that ability right now. And you can do that with technology, because these kids are around technology all the time and they're in a digital world. But then we try to make it this, old school linear book world. And it's like, well, that's just not what they're going. So that's why so many kids are enjoying this period, because they don't just have to sit in a desk all the time. So it's going to be a big time for all the educators to sit together, sit with the parents, educators, and say, hey, okay, here's what's the best outcome for our children. And they have to come together, because everybody right now is pointing out what could be better, complaining. That's nice, but you need to actually sit down and work together as a group and say, okay, here's what's going to be ideal to make sure that they are prepared for, quote, the 21st century, which we're already in.
Well, and and it's what better time to revamp a system that that folks have criticized for a while, but now it's actually something that we can truly look at it differently. All eyes are on education. And I know that we're running out of time, and I'm sure there's everyone on here is going to want to connect with each of our panelists after we leave here today. So if I could have each of the panelists share the best way to connect with you outside of this webinar and to keep the conversation going, whether it's social media, your YouTube channels, websites, email, whatever that may be, if you could share that out. And thanks again for giving us your time today as panelists and sharing your expertise and so many great thoughts on this on leading and communicating in this remote environment. I'm going to be careful about saying virtual now. Thanks for that, Jaime. And if you're interested in being a panelist on a future webinar or even a guest on our podcast, please email me at info@ncla-cte.org, and I'll include that in the chat. And those of you who are watching remotely, you'll also see a link to the chat so that you're able to access this information if you're watching this through the recording. And also, if you have topics that you would like for us to address in the future, please share that. I hope everyone has a wonderful Cinco de Mayo. Enjoy the rest of your day. Oh, and also, please be sure to join us on May 11th. We'll have a special webinar with Kevin McCaskill and Aaron Polanski, who are in Massachusetts and who are doing some really great innovative work. So you'll see in the email, the follow-up email for this, a link to that webinar. Thanks everyone, and have a wonderful day.
Bye. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everybody.
Rachel still here?
I'm here. Thank you. This was fantastic. Wow, so much great conversation. Thank you. We didn't get to a lot of the questions, but that's okay. I think that everything that we discussed was really, really important. So thank you.
Great. Hey, Rachel, I put my domain on the chat just so you know.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I put it out to the right. Okay.